They thought it was just a moth. A strange one, sure. Too big, too pale, too still. But still, just a moth. That was the mistake. Because by the end of that night, one old woman would be dead, one man would be screaming, and the thing they'd trapped in a glass jar would turn a quiet family gathering into a nightmare no one in that town would ever forget. And nobody, not one person on that porch, would think to ask the question that mattered. Why was it flying in daylight at all? It all started in the heat. That unbearable, unnatural heat. The kind that made the air feel thick enough to swallow. The kind that pressed down on the skin like a wet blanket. The kind that made even silence feel heavy. Over the empty streets of Hollow Creek, the sun hung like a giant copper coin suspended in a dead sky. It didn't look warm. It looked hostile. It looked like something watching. The road shimmered with heat, the asphalt softening in the afternoon blaze. Beyond the town, the land stretched out into dry, sandy emptiness, broken only by a few scrubby weeds and the occasional crooked fence line. Everything looked bleached. Everything looked tired.
God, it's unbearable, Liam muttered. He wiped his sunburned hand against a wooden post and squinted toward the horizon, as if staring hard enough might force the sun to move. But it didn't. It just hung there, still, staring back. "Liam, are you almost done?" a woman's voice called from the porch. Yeah, just a little longer," Liam answered. He ducked back under the old porch and disappeared into the shadow beneath the house, where the air was only slightly less suffocating. There, hidden from the blazing light, he continued whatever strange little project he'd been working on for the past hour. No one else in the family really knew what he was doing down there, and Liam wasn't exactly eager to explain. Meanwhile, out by the veranda, his sons, Ben and Noah, were racing around like they had no idea the world was melting around them. The porch had once been the heart of the house. On cool nights, the whole family would gather there. They'd sit in rocking chairs, sip lemonade, and talk about the day while the crickets sang in the grass and the moonlight washed everything silver. But now the same porch felt like a furnace. The wooden boards were hot underfoot. The railings were warm to the touch. Even the shadows seemed to sweat. And still the boys ran, laughing, shouting, chasing each other in circles through the heat. It should have been a boring summer evening, the kind that blurs together with all the others. But Ben and Noah had never been the kind of boys who stayed bored for long. They've always found something. A bug, a snake, a broken fence to climb, a creek to wade through, some little mystery to chase until it turned into an adventure. That day, they found something stranger than usual, something moving through the air in broad daylight, a moth. But not just any moth. It was flying in the middle of the afternoon, drifting lazily through the heat like it didn't belong to the same world as everything else. And if either boy had looked closely, really looked, they might have noticed it wasn't drifting with the wind at all. It was drifting toward the house. Ben spotted it first. He stopped so suddenly Noah nearly ran into him. "Hey, look." Noah followed his gaze, and his eyes widened.
The moth was huge. Not just large for a moth, huge. Its pale wings caught the light every time it turned, flashing white against the copper sky. It moved in an odd, wavering pattern, as if it were unsure of where it was going or whether it even cared. For a moment, both boys just stared. Then instinct took over. Get it. They took off after it, Ben carrying a giant glass jar, Noah clutching a ridiculous assortment of homemade butterfly-catching tools they'd cobbled together from wire, string, and old pieces of wood. Their feet pounded the hot boards of the porch. The moth drifted toward the side yard. "On your side," Noah shouted. "I know. Grab it. If I miss, it'll get away. You idiot, it's right there." Almost. Got it. Ben lunged forward and slammed the rubber lid onto the jar with a triumphant grin. The moth thrashed inside the glass, its pale body beating against the sides in frantic, muffled motions. Noah leaned in, breathing hard. "Wow," he said. "It's bigger than I thought." Ben held the jar up in the light and turned it slowly.
The thing inside was unsettling. Even trapped, it moved with a strange, jerky energy. Its wings were folded along its body in a way that made it look almost like a little paper airplane, only alive. Its white color was wrong somehow. Too pale, too clean, too close to the color of bone. Neither boy noticed that it hadn't tried to fly since the lid went on. It was watching them. "Let's show the others," Noah said. "Why not?" By evening, the heat had finally started to loosen its grip on the town. The sun was sinking, slow and red, dragging itself toward the horizon like it didn't want to leave. The sky had turned into a smear of orange and bruised purple, and the first hint of cool air was beginning to move through the yard. The family gathered on the veranda one by one.
Liam came up from under the porch, dust on his shirt and sweat on his face. His wife, Mara, followed with a tired smile and a glass of water in her hand. Old grandmother Janice shuffled out next, wrapped in a faded cardigan despite the heat. Uncle Ralph came after her, silent as always, his hands shoved into his pockets. And then there was Gideon, the grandfather, sitting a little apart from everyone else, as if he preferred the edge of the world to the center of it. Liam switched on the porch light. The bulb buzzed softly overhead, casting a yellow glow across the table and benches. None of them thought to wonder what that light might draw in from the dark beyond the yard. For a while, nobody said much. Crickets began chirping in the dry grass beyond the yard. Somewhere in the distance, a frog gave a low, lonely croak. The sky deepened into a rich blue-black, and one by one the stars began appearing overhead, scattered across the darkness like tiny sparks. A breeze moved through the yard. Not much of one, just enough to make the leaves rustle, just enough to make the night feel alive.
Mara was the first to speak. "Well, tell us what happened today." Liam looked around the table, then cleared his throat. "Today Norton came by again," he said. "He was talking about the debt. Said he had a solution." At once, Gideon let out a sharp, bitter sound. "Damn that swindler," he snapped. "Don't listen to him. Don't trust him. I knew his father." And just like that, the old anger returned. Every time Norton's name came up, the whole family seemed to sink into the same old wound. Norton Mercer, son of Charles Mercer, owner of a private bank, owner of several factories, a man with money, influence, and a smile that never seemed sincere. According to Gideon, Charles had been a liar all his life, a hypocrite, a man who smiled in daylight and cheated in the dark. And Norton, his son, had followed in his footsteps. It was Norton who had convinced them to take out the loan. It was Norton who had promised them a profitable investment. It was Norton who had talked them into trusting him. And now the Harrisons were buried under a debt of $20,000. Mara folded her hands in her lap. "Still," she said quietly, "Norton used to be Liam's best friend." She glanced at Liam, then back at the others. "Think about it. How could he do something like that?" Gideon shook his head, his face darkening. "He used to be kind," he muttered, "modest, but his father changed him. Charles Mercer was poison, always was." The conversation might have gone on like that for another hour. It usually did. The same arguments, the same bitterness, the same old helplessness circling around the table like a vulture. But then Liam raised a hand. "All right," he said. "Enough of the bad news." He paused. "I've got something better." That made everyone go quiet, not because they expected miracles, but because no one in that family had heard good news in a long time. And in that silence, The last quiet silence that porch would ever hold, each of them seemed to drift somewhere else, somewhere far away, into memory. Gideon sat back in his chair and remembered the farm where he'd grown up, the smell of hay in the barn, the lowing of cattle in the morning, the strength he used to feel in his own arms, old neighbors stopping by unannounced, roast beef on Sundays, fried potatoes, and the sound of people laughing around a crowded table. A lump rose in his throat.
Liam thought about his youth, the carefree school days, the long afternoons by the lake, the first time he'd kissed Mara, the first night they'd spent together, when everything in the world had still felt possible. He looked at her now and felt, all at once, the urge to reach for her hand. Mara, in turn, remembered her mother, her childhood home, the trip to Chicago years ago, when the city had seemed impossibly large and full of promise, the days she had spent beside Liam, before debt and worry had settled over them like dust. Uncle Ralph, who almost never spoke, sat staring into the darkness. He remembered Maggie, his first love, the one he had lost. It had been sad, tragic, and the memory still carried the chill of that rainy day when everything had gone wrong. Could he have saved her? Would it have mattered if he had said the words more often? Would she still be alive if he had simply told her he loved her? Grandmother Janice had already fallen asleep in her chair, her head tilted slightly to one side, her breathing soft and even. So whatever memories she had, they stayed hidden behind her closed eyes. She would never wake up to tell anyone what they were.
No one spoke. The night held them all in place. Then a bright voice broke through the stillness. "Can we show you something?" Ben. He and Noah were standing near the edge of the porch, each of them grinning with barely contained excitement. Liam blinked, pulled out of his thoughts. Yeah, he said. "What is it?" The boys exchanged a look. Then, with a heavy thud, they placed the glass jar in the middle of the table. Everyone except Janice leaned forward to look. Inside, crawling slowly against the glass, was the moth. Up close, it looked even stranger. Its body was thicker than it should have been. Its wings were folded neatly along its sides, but every so often they twitched, as if it were trying to unfold something it had no business hiding. "Wow," Mara said, peering closer. "Where did you find it?" "We caught it here," Ben said proudly. "It was crawling on the table." Mara frowned. "It's huge. What does it eat?" "We don't know," Noah admitted. "We didn't feed it." She looked at the jar more closely, and her expression shifted. Well, it could starve. Then she noticed something else. There aren't even any air holes. How is it still moving?
The boys looked at each other. Neither of them had thought about that. Nobody at that table thought about it either. Not for long enough. Mara straightened up. "Let's let it go." "Okay, Mom," the boys said in unison. Gideon gave a dry little chuckle. "Let's hope that giant moth doesn't eat our clothes." Ben and Noah pulled off the rubber lid and tilted the jar. For a second, nothing happened. Then the moth surged forward. It flew out in one slow, heavy motion, its wings opening wide as it escaped the glass prison. It was enormous, with a wingspan of nearly 6 inches and a body just over 4 inches long. It looked less like an insect and more like some pale, impossible creature that had wandered in from a dream. It rose into the air and began circling the porch light. The bulb above them cast a cold, yellow glow over its body. The moth turned and turned, showing off its broad white wings, its fleshy underside, and its huge, net-like eyes that seemed to catch the light in a way that made them look almost wet. Everyone watched. Liam, Mara, Gideon, Ralph, even the boys. For a moment, the whole family was caught in the same strange fascination. It was beautiful in the way certain things are beautiful when they should not be. Then the moth drifted away from the bulb, slowly, deliberately, toward Janice, toward the sleeping old woman in her chair. No one noticed at first, not until it was already too late. The moth landed directly on top of her head and went still. The porch fell silent, so silent that the crickets seemed to stop too. Then Gideon let out a laugh. Well, looks like Janice can still attract the men. He slapped his thighs and chuckled. Ralph gave a nervous smile. They'll be sleeping together now. The joke barely had time to land, because the next second, Janice screamed.
It was so sudden, so violent that it felt like the whole night had split open. She jerked upright in her chair like a corpse rising from an open coffin. Her arms flailed wildly, her fingers clawed at the air. She tried to reach the top of her head, but her body wouldn't obey. Her bones were too brittle, her muscles too weak. The moth clung to her scalp, and Janice screamed again, a sound so raw and terrible it drowned out everything else. Ben and Noah stumbled backward, shouting in panic. Gideon fell out of his chair and hit the porch hard, crying out for help. "Damn it, do something! Janice! Janice!" But Janice kept screaming. Blood began spilling from her mouth as torn ligaments gave way. The sound was no longer human. It was something deeper than pain, something older, something that sounded like hell itself had found a voice. "What is it? Oh my God, what's happening?" Mara cried. "The moth!" Gideon gasped, swaying wildly. "Get it off her, hurry!" Then the whole neighborhood seemed to wake up at once.
Lights flicked on in nearby houses, maybe in every house on the street. Doors opened, windows lit up. People came pouring out into the road, drawn by the scream like moths to a flame. Bare feet slapped against the asphalt. Lanterns were raised. Kerosene lamps were lit. The night filled with movement and shouting and the frantic glow of human hands trying to make sense of the horror. Liam lunged at Janice, grabbed the moth's body, and tried to pull it free. He yanked. Nothing. It wouldn't come off. It felt stuck there, fused to her skull, like it belonged there. Liam clenched his fist around the creature and pulled harder. There was a sickening crack. Other people rushed in and grabbed him by the arms, dragging him back. Then came one final horrible scream, and Janice's frail body collapsed to the ground, dead. For one stunned second, nobody moved. Nobody breathed. Then Liam screamed, and panic tore through the crowd. All over again.
He stared down at Janice's head. The top of her skull was a bloody ruin, spraying red fluid and torn skin and pieces of something no one wanted to name. Then Liam looked at his own hand. It was hissing, covered in blisters, blackened in places, as if the flesh had been burned by something far hotter than fire. Beside him lay the crushed remains of the moth, and beneath it, the ground gave off thin white smoke. Liam kept screaming. Through the shattered wreck of Janice's skull, a pulsing brain was visible. It looked like red paste. People crowded closer, shoving, cursing, staring. No one could look away.
"Ben, Noah, where did this thing come from? How did it get into our house?" someone shouted. Mom, we didn't mean to," the boys cried, but their voices were swallowed by the noise. Mara rushed to them and grabbed their hands. "Where did it come from? How did that thing get into town?" "We don't know, Mom," Ben sobbed. "We found it on the table." Realizing no one was getting any answers, Mara shoved past them and ran to Liam. She grabbed his shoulders and tried to pull him inside. "Move! All of you, do something!"
Gideon pushed through the crowd, stumbled out of the circle, and collapsed to the ground. Clutching his chest, he whispered over and over, "Janice,
Janice! Ralph ran to him, pale and shaking. Hey, are you okay? Gideon's eyes were wide now, wild with something close to terror. It's Charles Mercer, he rasped. Charles was a collector. Flying insects. Exotic ones. He sent that thing. He swallowed hard. He killed Janice. The crowd erupted. Fearful shouts, curses, disbelief. Gideon, you're delirious, Ralph said. That proves nothing. Why would Charles have a creature like that? Why would he want Janice dead? He shook the old man by the shoulders, trying to bring him back. But Gideon wasn't looking at him anymore. His gaze had drifted somewhere else, somewhere beyond the people, beyond the porch, beyond the yard. Ralph frowned. It was as if the old man couldn't even focus on him anymore. What is it? Ralph asked. And then he saw it too. The sky had gone strangely quiet. Not just dark, quiet, as if the world had lost its voice. The stars above them began disappearing one by one, but something was wrong with the way they vanished. It wasn't like clouds passing over them. It was more like something was swallowing the light. A shape moved overhead. Slowly. Too slowly. A cloud? But we hardly ever get rain here. No. It wasn't a cloud. The people in the yard huddled together, lifting their lanterns and lamps higher. White light, yellow light, red light from torches, orange light from candles. Together they formed one giant glowing beacon in the night. And all around that light, moths began to gather. Dozens of them, then hundreds, drawn in from the darkness. A cold wind swept through the yard, and the shouting still didn't stop, not even then. Not when the first shadow passed over the porch, not when the lantern flames began to tremble, not when the sky above them seemed to fill with wings. Because they had trapped one moth in a jar and called it a curiosity. They had no idea it was a scout. And whatever sent it, it was coming down.